And welcome back to episode 2 of FrostBytes, where logistics and tech meet a fresh perspective. I'm your host and co-founder of PackSafe, Ilya Preston, and today we're joined by a true leader in global supply chain innovation, Hany Salama. In this episode, we're going to dive in to not only his incredible career, but also his perspectives on technology, overcoming industry challenges, and what's next for cold chain logistics. Hany joins us with over 25 years of experience in the life sciences sector, specializing in global supply chain and commercial operations. Hany has a rich history of working with large and mid-cap organizations across various drug and over-the-counter categories. And Hany is currently playing a pivotal role as Senior Vice President and General Manager for McKesson's private label generics and over-the-counter business. So with that, Hany, thank you so much for joining, and we're thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So, Hany, before we jump into your intro, your background, your experiences, we like to start off with a shock to the system with what we call Hany's hot take. I'm curious to hear, what is one opinion that you have about the cold chain logistics industry that others might find controversial or contrarian?
Yeah, no, great question. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be controversial, but they may not completely agree. I would say probably the largest thing that as the modalities of different drugs across biopharma and life sciences are evolving, I would say it's highlighting the fragmentation of the supply chain and the monitoring and agility of cold chain logistics. And I would say, I don't, some will have a different reaction and say, well, I think we're doing okay. But as the geographies are changing, as the supply chains, the manufacturing is changing, our 3PL providers, our freight forwarding providers are coming in, new technologies coming in, bringing it all together. I would say there's a little bit more to go in terms of alignment and the disparity of data and data flow.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, as we think about just thinking through kind of even the evolution of terminology and kind of messaging within the industry, we think back to kind of visibility, right? Being the OG 10, 15 years ago, then you kind of get into risk. And now, to your point, these disparate data sources, these various systems, tying it all together, it's really about orchestration, it seems like, more than anything else, right?
That's exactly right. And orchestration is probably the best term for it. Is you have multiple trading partners. So the value chain hasn't changed, right? When you think about pharma to the distributors to end customers, whether it be on the institutional side, on the retail side, that hasn't fundamentally changed. What changed is the subsectors amongst those players, right? So when I look at the pharma side, and I look at the level of outsourcing that went out to external manufacturing, the leveraging of 3PLs over the last 2 decades. When you think about all of that, and then you think about it at a macro level, globalization and the demand that's coming in for these drugs and the different modalities, there was a fundamental shift. I'd say, I'm going to date myself here from a career standpoint. When I started my career, it was heavy, small molecule, ambient temperatures. As things evolve, right, and the maturity of the small molecule portfolio has evolved and matured, we've shifted dramatically into large molecule biologics, right? And that's where the refrigerated space came heavier. And that was quite some time. And now we're getting into even more complicated drugs, more complicated modalities, right? And yet lending itself to a complex cold chain and global logistics portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges today in kind of tying together all of this information? I know we'll get into much more detail on this a little later in the show, but just, you mentioned tying these disparate data sources together, making sense of kind of all the data that's always been there, and obviously mixed in with the added complexities on the product side, on the distribution side, the routings, et cetera. What do you think are kind of the biggest blockers to executing on bringing it all together?
Yeah, it's mapping out, and I've lived through several pharma companies, and where I am today, mapping out the entire ecosystem of all the trading partners. And that's clear today. But in many cases, we tend to stop when title transfers. And so the baton handoff to the next trading partner, that's where you get I don't own that product anymore. I don't own the data. I don't need to worry about the data. That's where I think the opportunity is. And so if you're looking at digitizing the entire ecosystem, agnostic of who the partner is and where the title resides, that's what I think is important. And then what data is relevant, right? We've always monitored, so ever since cold chain came to be, whether it be a less sophisticated solution, there was always a level of monitoring, whether it was real time or a passive solution that gave us the data. We knew that the product started at one point and ended at another, and it was within the boundaries of the temperature ranges. That is not enough anymore. That is I would say it's the bare minimum. And now we're looking at more sophisticated things, especially given the complexity of the drugs, the patient dynamics, the channels that we're selling into. And I would say as we continue to evolve specialty drugs, the cost of the drug alone and the spoilage that could forget the spoilage and the dollars, more importantly, the patient impact. These are, in some cases, very sick patients that are waiting for the treatment. And if there's a compromise in the supply chain, it ultimately leads to lack of continuity of care.
I couldn't agree more with you. That's a great hot take, not overly controversial. So let me ask you maybe a bit of a controversial question. With regards to visibility in the supply chain and kind of traditionally how we understand visibility, right? Aggregating all this information in one place, attaching sensors to products. Do you believe the visibility component as it's deployed today is overrated in kind of trying to solve for these challenges that you've just outlined?
I don't think it's overrated. I think, in fact, as we peel back and we stop to the point I was making earlier regarding, hey, my role in the supply chain or value chain is this. It passes off to this. I lose visibility, and that's historically as it's always been.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, any member of the trading partner is ultimately there servicing the supply chain with the patient in mind. If we start with the patient and you work our way back, you'll see that there's disparity in the data flow and there's challenges in aggregation of data and what data is relevant, whether it be if you're aggregating weather pattern, geopolitical, temperature, vibration, whatever all the factors are. And I don't think that is fully matured, to say the least, today.
100% agree with you there. I think we certainly learned through our journey that more data doesn't always equal better outcomes. It's really about determining which data is most relevant, contextualizing it, making sure it's clean input data, and that really drives kind of the accuracy and reliability of what you're looking at on the outcome side.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing, is the visibility to be able to help us make more. Needs to be more predictive than reactive. Historically, for my entire career, we have a crisis at point A. We need to mitigate risk. So,
100%. Awesome. That's a great hot take. So let's switch gears to your journey in a segment that we call Hany's Cold Start. More than anything, we'd love to hear about those early kind of formative years of your experience. You've obviously had an incredible path throughout the world of pharma and more recently supply chain distribution and logistics. So you've been on both sides of the table. Can you walk us through how you got started, kind of a high level overview of your path and how you're sitting here today as SVP at McKesson?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always had a passion early on in my, even college years for science and particularly how it ties out to healthcare. Wasn't necessarily interested in going to the medical route, but something along those lines. And I had an affinity for pharmaceutical drugs and for patient care. And so got involved early on as an engineer, was building facilities around the globe. The world was changing in terms of vertically integrated. Now we have this term of supply chain, right? And it was like, okay, what is supply chain? It's connecting all the pieces together to be able to bring products to market, both on the clinical side as well as on the commercial side. And so like I mentioned earlier, much of that early part of my career was in small molecule, oral solid dosage, topicals, all various forms of semi-solids and liquids. There was a pivotal point in the, say, early 2000s where a lot of those big blockbuster drugs and small molecule came to exclusivity term. And I personally saw this shift toward biologics, right? Specialty care drugs. And you see some of those blockbuster hero drugs that really have transformed patient care in a meaningful way. And that's where cold chain started coming in for me and saying, okay, I was way back in my career, I worked on 2 blockbuster cancer drugs. And those were the first that we had to design an end-to-end cold chain solution, right? And when you think about the site of manufacturing, how to get from the manufacturing site to a warehouse, from the warehouse to a distributor, and so on and so forth, that was complicated. And I would say the infrastructure was still widely unknown. And this is, again, we're talking 2 to 8C, which is complex for back then. Now we're in very different ranges and varying everything from frozen down to -35 to ultra frozen down to -70, -80. So when you think about that evolution, it was pivotal for me. It was great learning on the pharma side and how we can, again, looking with the patient in mind and the channels and the segments that we serve through the group of distributors to get that product out. How do we ensure the integrity all the way out to the end customer? The mode by which whether it be active solutions or passive solutions to move the drug, is it container loads, less than container loads, and then ultimately to get it out to patients. So it's been quite the journey. I've learned a lot through the years, but as I see this next wave of evolution and technology and innovation, it's really about digitizing the data and how do you fortified the physical supply chain. Now, how do you digitize even further the end-to-end data set to be able to get predictive results?
That's well said. I guess one of the things I've learned throughout my career is that there's trade-offs to virtually every single decision that you make, and usually there's very little that's completely black or white. Everything's typically in the gray. Given that you've been on both sides of the table, meaning on the pharma side, now on the logistics service provider side, what are some of the biggest competing interests that you've seen between the two sides? Obviously, I think the obvious one that comes to mind is, pharma wants transparency, they want data, right? And I think the LSPs want to provide the best possible service that they can, but transparency could come at the expense of highlighting inefficiencies or exposing weak points in the network or something else. So how do you strike that balance? And what are those biggest trade-offs that you've seen being on both sides of the table?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. And I would say I take a very pragmatic approach to it, living on both sides, right? And the pragmatic approach is about if we start with the end in mind, right? How do we solve complex solutions? And I would say firsthand, living on the current side I'm on today and living through the pandemic. And I was at my current employer through the pandemic and saw how we operated together with pharma to commercialize very, very complex supply chains and very uncharted territory with temperature ranges at scale. This is the first of its kind. And I would say, I think at that point, it was pivotal for me how it can be done and how data sharing is important between all members of the supply chain and value chain to be able to get the end result. Again, in this case, it's how do we commercialize in a scalable and timely manner vaccines that need to get out to patients for preventative care. And so that data sharing for me worked exceptionally well. It worked in the sense that, hey, It's not about it's your issue or it's my issue or it's somebody else's issue. It's more about we have an issue. We across, again, across all members of that value chain, we have an issue that we need to solve for collectively, whether it be pharma, distribution, whether it be the end provider, whether it be retail or institutional, as well as the ancillary providers, active, passive solution providers, et cetera, coming around the table together to solve complex problems. So did we have it nailed down? Is it fixed forever? No. But I think the industry collectively has made tremendous progress.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the things that I've seen in speaking with folks that spend the majority of their careers in healthcare, and I think in your case, you've been touching healthcare in some form since your time at BASF, right?
Yeah.
So I think, there's obviously the complexity and the complexity and the interest side of it, but then there's also the altruistic side of it, which is what kind of keeps people around. You feel like you're helping people, right? And it's tangible, and what's kept you around?
Yeah, some days I'm not sure, but most days it's actually, there's just so much more to do. When you look at the evolution of medicine and patient care, and as the evolution of the middle class evolving and requiring more care, the aging population, certainly in the US, that is what keeps me going. And when you think about whether you're on the small molecule brand side, whether you're on the genericized portfolio, whether you're on the biologics or biosimilar side, you're solving, at the end of the day, complex cases for patient care and betterment of healthcare outcomes. That's what keeps me around. And the other thing too is, as an engineer by training, I love tinkering with problems and trying to solve for X in the equation, right? And it's about not who or what or our singular accountability and a siloed mentality, but more around end-to-end solution. The other thing too is, as we're getting much more evolved from a digital transformation perspective as an industry, we got a long way to go. Yeah. But I want to be part of that journey and how we can make an impact on the industry for the next generation to come, right? Whether it be technology platforms, innovative modalities of transportation, certainly on the logistics side, or the ability to advance clinical trials in a more meaningful way, most of them sitting on the biologic side, large molecule cold chain side. How can we get some of those innovative drugs to market faster through an efficient supply chain?
So on that note, what's been kind of your biggest challenge, your biggest obstacle that you've faced in trying to reach that goal?
Yeah, I would say you have to be very resilient in terms of the where you're hitting a wall. And the wall is really about, not because people are reluctant for change. People want change, but it's harmonization across and aligning on common objectives across the supply chain and across the value chain of, at the end of the day, what's in it for me, right? And when you get that alignment, when you get into whether your objective is visibility, whether your objective is sustainability, whether your objective is continuity of care, and it's a combination of all of those together. Yeah. And if there's alignment on what's in it for the constituent, you can move the needle. But I would say that's probably the hardest piece, because how do I make it a priority? And I'll get a lot of, well, it's not broken right now. Why do I need to fix it? But what you're missing is it's until you have a crisis that stresses the system as it stands today, you don't know, or you won't have it as a priority to fix it. And I'll go back to the pandemic. That got everybody to the table because everybody collectively had to work together. And in doing so, you identify, hey, what I relied on as a viable system, and I thought I have a good data and good data flow across the value chain, maybe not so much. And I strain the system. I've realized that I have an aha moment, and I need to, advance my visibility so I can predict a little bit better, move things along. But sadly, we get past that pandemic and everything kind of reverts back to business as usual.
Do you think the sentiment? So you mentioned something interesting. You said if it's not broken, don't fix it. I think the statistic. I know the statistic. Obviously, it's something like 20% of shipments experience deviations, temperature deviations in transit. $40 billion plus in product loss. And I think that's drastically underreported and under-recorded. But that being said, do you think the sentiment is it's not broken when there's that much waste in the supply chain?
I don't. I do think it's broken. It depends on what lens you're taking it. So you're looking at it from an aggregate number perspective. Mm-hmm. When you break it down and who in the supply chain is really feeling that impact, mm-hmm. and who's bearing the cost, it's a little bit of everyone. And it's adding to the cost ultimately to you and I as patients when we go fill our script. When we're all this waste in the system is adding to the cost of bringing products to market in an effective and efficient manner, right? So I do think the more visibility that's brought forth, and the more a collaboration across the team members, you're not necessarily going to see it from a regulator perspective. So the regulator said, "Hey, listen, you need to maintain this temperature because that's what you submitted in your submission." That maintain. And if it doesn't maintain, you got an excursion, you're gonna end up taking action, disposing of the drug, and you send new drug. So it's not going to take, in my opinion, it's not going to take regulators to change it. It's got to be the industry of saying, "Hey, we have an opportunity here." I'm not going to say necessarily a problem. We have an opportunity.
Yeah, perfect. Makes sense. All right, Hany, we know a little bit about you. We know a bit about your background, your experiences. It's time for a lightning round called hot, cool, or cold. So essentially, tell me if you're bullish, neutral, or pessimistic on each of the following subjects in about 15 to 20 seconds a piece. Does that work?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So real-time IoT devices for visibility.
Bullish. And I think there's going to be more of that. The technology has been evolving, has been around, and I think it's going to get further and further adoption.
Okay. Lane validation and lane risk assessment. Is it compliance or value add?
It's compliance for sure. Unequivocally compliance. It's an expectation from regulators. It's an expectation from and everybody across that value chain for sure.
Sustainability, check mark, or do people actually care?
It's somewhere in the middle. Back to your commentary on gray, I think there's an appetite, desire, and off of the conversations in boardrooms for more sustainable solutions. When you look at the cold chain today, it's daunting the lack of sustainability across cold chain logistics. I think it's going to be further conversation, but as anything tied to sustainability might come at a cost. That's the hurdle we have to cross.
Okay. Temperature deviations or excursions, at least from the pharma perspective, is it a sunk cost / cost of doing business, or is there a real initiative to reduce waste?
Yeah, it's definitely a sunk cost at this point. There's an objective to reduce waste. I would say it becomes a major objective when it's systemic at a product or lane level, but not as an aggregate necessarily objective.
Yeah. All right. This one's pretty touchy. Gen AI in temperature controlled logistics. Is it a fad or is it ready for prime time?
I don't think it's a fad. I don't know if it's ready for prime time. It's somewhere also in the middle. But I think there's a big appetite. Obviously, you open up any news article, any news feed, and we're talking about AI and how it can advance businesses, et cetera. I firmly believe in generative AI to be able to leverage and improve. I don't know if it's certainly going to be in the next 3 to 5 years. I would leave it there.
So I guess on that note, our listeners love to hear what's next. Gen AI certainly in the next 3 to 5 years sounds like that's on your roadmap. But looking forward, what trends or what other trends or innovations do you envision reshaping the cold chain over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think about it all the time. If you think about the cold chain supply chain, right? You have B2B, the B2B parts of it, meaning pharma trading to distributor, distributor trading to, say, retail or institution. That is, I would say, that leg of it is well established, whether it be active solutions, advanced passive solutions, et cetera. The last mile piece, right? And when you think about patient care, home care, patient care, or institutional patient care, that piece has tremendous opportunities for evolution, which is also tied to sustainability, but also as that evolves, is there a way to digitize? Because some of the losses occur quite a bit on that last mile leg.
Yeah.
And is there opportunities to, one, change, the container it's being shipped at? And again, the containers that have been used for parcel have been around for many, many years. Is there a way to evolve that? But also the data and the data flow, whereas that piece is, in my opinion, needs further evolution. And I think that will be coming in the next few years.
Excellent. So, before we wrap up, we'd love to hear about a logistics legend story. So a time when you or a colleague went above and beyond to get an incredible feat done. Do you have any kind of memorable story that you like to take with you from your career?
Yeah, I do, and I'm going to go back probably to the pandemic piece, and as we played a pivotal role in that, and watching, first shipments coming in, and the joy and the excitement of personnel looking at it and knowing that that's going to save lives, right? And that piece of it, and then working across members of pharma, government, other trading partners, 3PL providers, and everybody rallying. It was just a note. I hope to live long enough to tell my grandkids, that this is, I've experienced this. There's a few notable individuals that I worked with, and as they thought through and how they operated and bringing, again, patient care top of mind, it was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, we had certain customers within pharma that legitimately had watch parties, like as they deployed sensors into their lanes for the to support this pandemic effort. They had launch parties, which is just crazy to think about. But I can imagine that there's just a lot of alignment, cohesion, and maybe altruism to some extent that comes with being able to support that kind of coordination in such a short period of time, given the high stakes of what it is that you are supporting. So very cool.
That's exactly right.
So Hany, thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights with us and our listeners. To wrap up, could you leave us and our listeners with one kind of final cool piece of advice?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. And I would say the one thing is, let's just be open to the next wave of opportunity, so we can continue to transform this industry and give the proper patient care by collaborating across all members of the value chain and supply chain.
Yeah, I second that. So that's a great piece of advice. Thank you. That's one cool wrap for our second episode of FrostBytes. Hany, thank you again for being here and for all the wisdom that you've shared. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and stay connected for more insights from leaders in cold chain logistics. And also grab your copy of our IoT Maturity Curve ebook in the comments below this video on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. Until then, see you next time.